moving forward. So, there we go. Okay, so starting off with the science. There's a lot of complicated climate science, obviously, and I mean, it's very important, but for the everyday person, what's most important is understanding what the science is telling us. And what the science is telling us is that the world faces an emergency that's greater than anything we've ever faced before, and it threatens life as we know it and the future for generations to come. So that's what the science is saying. And climate change is a little bit like COVID in the sense that we really need to listen to the science and listen to what the experts are telling us. So the next slide is about climate injustice, which is a topic that doesn't get nearly as much attention as it should, and it's the fact that those who contribute the least to climate change are those who suffer the most from its impacts. And on top of the other forms of oppression that these people already face, so this is often people in developing countries, people of color, people living in poverty, and who sort of lack often like the financial resources to adapt to climate change. And so like if their house was in a flood zone, they're not able to just buy another house and move. And I also have this image looking at the difference between equality and equity, because oftentimes we talk a lot about equality and the need for everything to be equal and give everyone the same supports, but sometimes it's important to think about equity, because sometimes people don't need any supports and other people need even more supports, which brings everyone to the same level instead of just giving everyone the same resources. And that's pretty important when it comes to climate change as well. So we talked a little bit earlier about the Paris Agreement, and it's obviously like a really important landmark in the history of climate action, when world leaders all came together really meaningfully to work together towards these targets to keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that's what the science is telling us that we have to do if we want to have a safe and livable future for everyone. And so these targets were 50% emissions reductions by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. And so although these were made at the national level, they can also be applied at any level of government. So we were talking a little bit about this before, like businesses and in your own house, and definitely at the municipal level, we can look and say, okay, set that target for Sackville, 50% by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050, because that's what we have to do. And even though we aren't all of the emissions in the world, we're still setting that example and showing that it can be done. So to reach these targets, the reality is that the only way to reach these targets is with bold, drastic, and systemic action. So I've included this, the iceberg model here, which is a tool for guiding systemic thinking. And it sort of looks at the difference between using Band-Aid solutions and just covering up the issue over and over, rather than going and finding the root cause of the problem. And so it's like if there's flooding in roads, instead of just raising the road or putting in a culvert, looking at, okay, why is this flooding happening more and more often? Well, we're seeing more frequent and severe weather events and storms, and which is a direct result of climate change. So looking and seeing what's actually causing this flooding and addressing that instead. So a lot of people are demanding systemic change out in the streets and everywhere, but what does that really mean? Because systemic change is probably the most important concept when it comes to climate change, because there's no way that we are going to be able to solve this problem while working within the same system that allowed it to happen and caused it in the first place. So the first thing when we're looking at systemic change is dismantling the systems that are preventing us from stopping climate change, such as systems that allow oil and gas companies to continue extracting fossil fuels. We can't keep burning fossil fuels and stop climate change at the same time, because those two things are going in opposite directions. And just some other examples, systems that silence BIPOC voices, and BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, and systems that promote endless growth, because we live on a finite planet and we can't continue extracting natural resources to the extent that we are today. And in place of these systems that we're in the process of dismantling, hopefully. We'll be building systems that leave no one behind. So that's a really important piece, leaving no one behind, because everyone needs to be included in this transition, and all demographics need to have their voices heard, whether it's people living in poverty, people of color, oil workers, and there's going to be lots of opportunities for jobs in this transition, whether it be in the renewable energy sector or in public transportation. Yeah, so that's a little bit more about systemic change. And the climate strikes. So definitely an important piece of what's happened so far. If you look at media coverage of climate change before the climate strikes and the media coverage now and the attention that the issue has been given, it's incredible, really, because and it was the climate strikes that woke up the world and the reason why we're here today. And I think a lot of that is because of the unique perspective that we have as youth, because it's our futures that are in jeopardy, and looking forward, the decisions that we're making today are going to influence the rest of our lives. So there were strikes in Sackville and strikes all over the world, millions of users. It's really incredible what we were able to accomplish. And there's proof that we can change. So COVID is that proof. Every government, every level of government made huge changes in response to COVID-19. This image is a highway with like the stay home, essential travels only, and that highway is just empty, and we saw that all over the world. And that just proves the changes that we can make when we treat something as an emergency. So there's sort of no excuses anymore. People can't say, oh, this is too big, you know. All we need to do is treat climate change like the emergency that it is, and we can do amazing things working together, working with one another, and yeah, COVID is just proof of that. So this is our responsibility. Everyone alive right now has the responsibility to keep the climate emergency forefront in their minds when they're making decisions. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Obviously, a couple examples are just the urgency. We only have a narrow window of time to act, and the magnitude of the crisis. Obviously, it's the largest issue that we've ever faced, and every individual action matters, and the risk associated with climate change, and the interconnected nature of the issue, which is like especially important when it comes to decision making, because it means that every decision that you make is linked to climate change. And so everyone on Earth has this responsibility, but as municipal councilors and mayor, the responsibility is even greater, because the decisions that you are making when you approve projects and vote for motions and policy changes, they don't just affect yourself and your immediate family, but the entire community of Sackville. So it's definitely like an important thing to just keep in mind. And so this is our opportunity, and that's the way that I like to look at it. We have the opportunity to change. It doesn't have to be this giant, overwhelming problem that we have to somehow overcome. We can look at it as an opportunity. I mean, the opportunity is disappearing very quickly, but we still have the opportunity to use our imaginations moving forward. Because, like I was saying earlier, with systemic change, we're going to have to dismantle the systems that we have now and reimagine a world with new systems where we can work within the boundaries of the natural world. That means that we also have the opportunity to change a whole bunch of things at the same time. So thinking about what other issues can we fix, because it's all interconnected. What other issues can we fix at the same time as fixing climate change? So we can really use our imaginations for this, and I think it could be really exciting, working together as a community, everyone. And so I'd like to end with a question, and that question is, how do you imagine Sackville as a net zero community in the not so distant future?